Hey friends, welcome to Mark's Roamin, a Vanlife podcast. I'm Mark, a Canadian, and I live in a van with less than 100 square feet of living space. Since 2024, I've been exploring a nomadic life, traveling out of my hatchback. In 2026, I made the leap to full-time with a 2019 RAM ProMaster 3500 that I've been converting myself. Come along with me as I drive, hike, and paddleboard across North America. On today's episode, I'll be chatting through my Carlife days, the trips I took over the span of 2 years to test the lifestyle, and the challenges and lessons I learned in living in such a small space, and how that influenced the model and the build of my current van. And at the end, I'll share 5 simple things that are all I think you need to start traveling in your own vehicle, even if it's just a car. Today, I'm recording this on Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia, Canada. So welcome. Welcome to my Vanlife podcast. Just to give you a heads up of some future episodes that I'm hoping to do in the next couple will be the first half of the build process. I'm about 300 hours into this current van out of an estimated 600 hours to fully build it out. And I'm going to cover the first half of that process. As well as some of the basics of this lifestyle, like where do I stay overnight for free? What do I do about a toilet or cooking or showering? All of those kind of like basics about like how is this lifestyle possible and manageable on a more long-term basis. I'd like to do an episode covering some of that stuff. So before I get into some of the things for today's episode, I like to kind of cover some of the highlights and sort of low points of the last couple weeks of traveling. So the last episode I recorded was in Great Smoky National Park in Tennessee, just as I was beginning to enter the park. And since then, I've traveled all the way up the East Coast and through New England into Nova Scotia, Canada. So where were a couple of the highlights from the last few weeks? Definitely one of them was backcountry camping in Great Smoky National Park. I picked a spot that was about a 3-hour hike in, and mostly uphill. I I'd originally been toying with the idea of doing a much harder hike. I have a tendency of biting off more than I can chew at first, and then I realized that to get to the camping site I wanted, if I had went from the spot I was intending to start, would have included a 4,000-foot drop in elevation. And when I realized that, I was like, maybe there's a better spot that I can enter the trail network to get into this camping site. So I picked a much more manageable spot, 5,000 feet lower, and then went up 1,000 feet. It was still a 3-hour hike in with about 60 pounds on my back, but it wasn't too bad. It was just a beautiful, beautiful spot. I was in a mountain vale, and the campsite I was at, there was a creek that came down one side and a creek that came down the other, and they met together, and the camping spot was right in between these two creeks. So it was really gorgeous. It was there were a couple of water crossings to get in that were kind of challenging. Definitely got my feet wet in one of them and spent the next couple of days drying out my hiking boots. But yeah, it was beautiful. It was a little chilly this time of the year. It dropped down close to freezing the 3 nights that I was there. But it wasn't too bad. I've got a very small tent and a decent sleeping bag, so it wasn't too bad. And the other part too is just New England. I when I was young, I lived on the east coast of Canada in Nova Scotia, and I think there's something about that that's kind of in my blood, and so the feeling of New England, the vibe of New England, is just something I really resonate with. But I also like medium-sized cities, small to medium-sized cities, especially if there is like a seat of government there. In Canada, those would be like the provincial legislatures. In the US, that would be like the state house or the state capitol. There's just something about when you have that kind of concentration of government jobs in a certain area, as well as the wealth that comes with good paying government jobs. You get a certain flair or flavor to the city that might be missing otherwise in a city that would be of similar size. There's a bunch of those concentrated in a very small area in New England. I came through, went up through Pennsylvania, made my stop in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Any fans of The Office? It was a great spot to just kind of stop and hang out and nerd out for a little while. And then I went through Connecticut, Rhode Island, into Massachusetts. And so I did that all in like 2 days. They're very small states. Connecticut is not very large. Rhode Island is much smaller. And so like you can drive from like Hartford, Connecticut, which is the state capitals there, to the coast, and pass through Rhode Island and do it all in a day. It's that close together. And so I pretty much did that, although it was like over 2 days. And spent one night in Hartford, Connecticut. The Mark Twain Museum was there. It was really neat. And then over to Rhode Island, and spent a night there. Then over to Massachusetts, along the coast, some of those little fishing communities that are very, very old. They have a lot of history. And so that was really neat. In Rhode Island, this is something I've realized, is that if you go into the state houses, if you take the elevator all the way down to the basement floor, in a lot of them, they have kind of a gallery or a history museum. It's usually on the basement floor. In Rhode Island, it's kind of split. They have some on the basement floors. The history of Rhode Island dating back to like the early 1600s. And then if you go up to the second floor, the history that you learn about the like Rhode Island Charter being over 100 years older than the U.S. Declaration of Independence. If you go up one floor above that, they actually have the room, which is like temperature and light controlled, to preserve not the original charter of Rhode Island. This is the second charter of Rhode Island, because England had a little bit of a trial with democracy that is not a constitutional monarchy. So they had a little experiment without having a king. So this is Cromwell, if you know any of your British history. But after that ended and the monarchy was restored with the House of Stuart, the Rhode Islanders wanted a new charter that was recognized by the current monarch. And so they sent some people back and they got what was then the most liberal charter for any of the colonies that gave them the most freedom and the most rights, in terms of the right of self-governance and the freedom of religion. And so that original charter from, I think it was 1663, is still in the Rhode Island State House, preserved like underneath glass. And so it was just really neat to see and just learn some of that history. Like, for example, Rhode Islanders were the last to ratify the U.S. Constitution until there was a Bill of Rights, because they were afraid that a new central government was going to do the same thing that the King of England had done, which was to override their rights to self-governance. Anyway, so what does this have to do with Vanlife? Nothing. It was just I love learning like little bits of history like that, especially when there's something like you can actually look and see and touch and feel. You couldn't actually put your hands on it, but like you can see it under the glass, and it's the original thing, and it's over 400 years old, and so that is rare for North America to see things that are over 400 years old. And so it's just super cool. Yeah, so that was great. It was great just coming up through New England. And what was the worst thing? By far and away, the worst part right now is definitely the rising price of gas. With the war on. It's just especially when I crossed back into Canada, the U.S. is a little bit more insulated from the rise in oil prices, but there's definitely some sticker shock crossing back into Canada. Seeing prices at $1.92 a liter, I was like, oh no. And that also means that food prices are higher, and so that affects my travel plans, but that also affects what I can do as I travel. So I've really pulled back on definitely any kind of eating out, and sort of any extra activities that might cost money, like a tour or a visit to, an attraction or a park or a site that, costs $15 to get in or something like that. I've kind of really pulled back on all of that stuff because of the cost of gas. So, it is what it is. I didn't plan to start my van life journey uh, in a year in which the whole global economy would be under pressure because of limited oil supply. But it is what it is, and life throws you curveballs, and there's nothing I can do about the price of gas, so I just gotta make do as it is right now. So that's been a bit of a challenge. Anyway, this episode, the Carlife days, talking about. So I spent 2 years kind of trialing out traveling in a vehicle, um, before making the leap into moving into a vehicle. So it was about a year and a half of that before I even bought a vehicle, and then I bought one and spent about half a year converting it. And I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't just going to make this massive expenditure and buy a vehicle and, spend the money converting it and then move into it and realize I hate this. This actually sucks. Maybe it seemed more glamorous than it actually is, or more appealing than it actually was to me. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't making a really stupid decision, essentially. And so I tried it out with my car. That was some of the advice that I got just watching people online, watching YouTubers talk about traveling in a vehicle. And there were a number of them that said, just start with what you have. Start with the vehicle that you got and try that first. Because that will almost certainly be a smaller space, more challenging space than something like a van or a camper or a trailer or like a truck bed trailer, or like a rooftop tent, any of that kind of stuff. That all gives you more space than just the vehicle that you have. And so if you can do it in the vehicle that you have, then in theory, moving up to something with a little bit more space will just be easier and you'll enjoy it more. And so that's what I did. And it really just began with a road trip. I wasn't intending to explore a van lifestyle. I was just going to go on a road trip with a new car that I had bought. I talked a little bit more last week about this, especially that first trip. And I was essentially just asking myself this question of, like, if I'm going to do a 2-week road trip in this new car that I've bought, can I just sleep in my car instead of paying for hotels? Hotels, Airbnbs, they're all very expensive, especially when you're talking about, 14, 21, 30 nights. That gets very expensive very fast. So is there a way for me to do this sleeping out of my car? Camping was really out of the picture since it was still the tail end of winter, with snow and freezing rain in the forecast still. And so recognizing that it was going to be cold, is there a way for me to do this sleeping in my car? And that's really what that first trip was. It wasn't like there was a bit of like a fascination with the van life lifestyle. I kind of went down the YouTube rabbit hole just looking at ways that I can sleep in my vehicle for a couple of weeks. And naturally that pushes you straight to van life content. But I was just thinking, how do I do this for a couple of weeks without paying for hotels? But there was a moment during that trip that I I caught something. I just became enamored with the concept and the idea of van life. And it was actually here in Nova Scotia, other side of Nova Scotia from where I'm currently at. Um, I've got relatives in Nova Scotia. I went and visited them, and then I took a trip around the south shore of Nova Scotia. I went through what's called the Annapolis Valley, which is very like agriculturally productive area. Lots of fruit, lots of vineyards, lots of wine, lots of like little craft distilleries and breweries. And then you come around to the South Shore, which is really a lot like rural Maine. It's rugged. Um, like the beaches are rocky and stony. The shores, or like the tides, aren't like they are on the Bay of Fundy, so they're much smaller. Um, and it's just really kind of like a beautiful, lonely area. Lots of fog, lots of rain, and but very isolated. Not a lot of people. There was this moment I had my car kind of backed up onto like a rocky beach, and it was gray. It wasn't rainy. I had the back hatch, like the tailgate of the hatch back up, and I was in my sleeping bag in the back of the car, and I was just watching the ocean from inside of the car, and there was something quite magical about that moment for me of just being out in the wilderness in a vehicle next to a shoreline. And even though it wasn't warm, even though I didn't really have any amenities in the vehicle, I didn't even really have a fridge. I just had this tiny little like plug-in cooler that could hold like 6 cans of pop, and it was just enough for like some cold cuts or hot dogs or something like that. And but there was something about that moment that really kind of captured my heart and my attention. And really that moment has kind of driven what I've been looking for over the last couple of months as I've traveled in my van, is like these places that are quiet and isolated next to a shoreline. Um, yeah, I don't know what it is for me. There's just something about those spaces that um, feels restful, that feels at home, that feels soothing to my soul. And yeah, so that was the moment that I knew there is something here for me. I don't know how long, I don't know in what way, but there's something in this experience that is speaking to my soul, that is nurturing for me, and I need more of whatever this is. Um, and so that's kind of how like car life and van life began for me. It was this moment of being captured by being in nature that was facilitated through being able to travel and live out of a vehicle. Uh, and so over the next year and a half, as I did more trips, some, some longer, some shorter, I wasn't like living in my vehicle full time. I still had an apartment. But as I did some more trips, I just kept asking myself this question: what can I improve for not much money for my next trip? What do I mean by not much money? Less than $500. Like, what can I improve about my system for less than $500 before my next trip? Um, and that became how I figured out what were some of the things that I would need or not need in traveling in a vehicle more full time. But even just in my car, like, how do I make this setup more functional for me? Because if it's not very functional, if it feels stressful, if it feels exhausting, I'm just not going to do it. When I was younger, I used to think about people who, RV camped, and I was like, that's not really camping. But one of the things I realized is that with backcountry camping or a canoe trip or something like that, is like the group spends the year planning this trip, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, canoes. How do you get them out, or like out into a remote area, and then bringing all of your food and all of your gear, doing the trip. And it takes about a full week, and you're spending a couple of days of preparation before and after. But with an RV, everything's already in the vehicle. So all you gotta do is get groceries and clean clothes, a suitcase, and then you're ready to go. And so you end up you utilize the like weekends or opportunities between work much more frequently because the ease of access is much easier. And so I was trying to do the same thing with my car. Like, how do I make the system work better so that it's easy just to jump in my car and go for a weekend? And so, first of all, the first thing I did, the first thing I needed to improve for my next trip was blackouts for my windows. First trip I did to Boston, the East Coast, I didn't have any way of really blacking out my windows. I did have like a reflective screen for the windshield that I bought, just like local hardware store. Um, and then I bought like these suction cup like I don't know, like they're kind of like a tinting screen for windshields, to keep the sun out of the eyes of a baby or something like that. It just suction cup to the windows. Those did not work well. They weren't custom made for my vehicle, so they didn't really cover the window well. The back one didn't work at all. The suction cups just kept falling off of them. The only way I was able to keep it up was to like push some gear up against it. Um, and like thankfully the car I had, like all the windows were tinted except the windshield, and pretty heavily. It's just the last owner put on a pretty dark tint on all of the windows. And so at nighttime, if the lights were off, I still had some decent privacy. But that was one thing I realized, is that I needed something more. If I was changing in the vehicle, if I had a light on in the evening, but also just for when I'm parked somewhere during the daytime, if I need to go into the grocery store, or I was going for a walk or a hike, I didn't want to have all of my gear visibly obvious to anybody walking by. The theft risk there. So I needed a better way of blocking out the windows, but also like the self-conscious feeling of like sitting, lying in the back of my bed, in the back of my car, maybe with a small light on, or, watching something on my phone. I'm just aware that anybody walking by can look straight through the window. It's nighttime, so the tints don't really matter. If there's light inside the vehicle, people can see that. And so I just knew I needed a better way of doing that. And so I just learned on YouTube. There are people who have created blackouts, like custom blackouts for their own vehicle, and they lay out all of the instructions on YouTube. And so I bought a glue gun, some spray adhesive. I got a roll of like flexible reflective insulation. Sometimes it's called like Reflectix, sort of like the Kleenex name, just a brand of it. And then some black fabric, and just some foam board, like from a dollar store, like some presentation board, just to give some rigidity and a little bit of extra insulation to it. And so I just put the Reflectix on the one side of the foam board, and then the black fabric on the other side, and glued it all together. After making like just a stencil, or a cutout out of paper and cardboard, kind of measured out the window and used that to size everything correctly. And I did that for each of the windows of the vehicle, with the exception of the windshield. With the windshield, I just took the hardware store car windshield screen, and then I just added the black fabric to one side of it. And those worked really, really well. I sized them up just a little bit so that you had to kind of like push it into the window. So it was just slightly oversized, as opposed to having magnets like sewn in or glued in. And that worked well enough. Sometimes, like, there was one that wasn't quite sized right and had a tendency of like popping out of the windshield or out of the window. So that was kind of annoying, but for the most part, it all worked really, really well. And I did the whole thing. Oh, it was probably under $75 to do the whole thing, and so those made such a significant difference. So some of that was with insulation, with like heat and cold. It also made the vehicle more stealthy. There was still it wasn't perfect. There was still some light that leaked out, but it blocked most of the light, unless you were really kind of looking at it. And when the lights were out at night, the car gave absolutely no indication that somebody was sleeping inside. Unless you were to walk up to the windshield and then even yeah, you couldn't see anything. You couldn't see in. All you would see is that somebody had a black cover over the windshield. And so that made such a big difference in terms of privacy, the stealth factor of the vehicle, and in just safety, and comfort of mind while I was sleeping inside. So that worked really, really well, and that was helpful for the next trip, which was just a couple of nights traveling for work. But then my next big trip, I did a 3-week trip into Northern Ontario. And again, I was asking myself, what can I improve for not all of that much money? So there were a couple of big improvements I made for this trip. The biggest one was a proper bed. Before, I just had an air mattress. It deflated, and then I had a foam pad that was not very comfortable, and it was still not that high off of the back of the car, and so there was still a lot of heat loss kind of through the little foam pad into the vehicle. But also in raising the sleeping platform, even by a couple of inches, I was able to gain some additional storage space. And so I just bought a trifold 4-inch foam mattress off of Amazon. It was very small. It was only 2 feet wide and 6 feet long. I'm 5'10", so even though it was tight, it was doable. And then I built a really simple platform out of plywood that would fit that length of a foam mattress. And so I did this in 3 sections. The first 2 sections were bigger, like a 6-inch, 6 inches tall. The tops had lids that could open just on simple hinges, so that way I could, lift the mattress up and shove stuff in underneath the bed. And then the last section, because it's a hatchback, so you don't have 72 inches of length space between the back of the hatch and the back of the passenger seat. Unless you slide the passenger seat all the way forward. So I had a Hyundai Elantra GT, and when you slide that passenger seat forward and push, angle that seat forward, you have just 72, maybe 73, 74 inches of space. And so that third section, I actually had it hinge back down. So it was hinged onto the middle section. And so it normally was kind of folded up on top of it. But then I would set up the bed at night, and I would just flip that hinge back towards the passenger seat, and I had just enough space to set out this 72-inch foam mattress. So it was just enough space, and it gave me a little bit of extra storage space underneath. And that made such a huge difference. Having a flat bed, 4 inches of memory foam is not all of that much. If you go with a memory foam bed, they're usually at least 6 inches. The one that I have in my van is 8 inches. Full-on beds are closer to 10 or 12. But 4 inches was just enough for insulation and also a little bit of comfort. So I didn't quite feel the plywood underneath of it. And that, yeah, just having a real sleeping setup made such a difference mentally about sleeping in the vehicle. And a couple other things that I bought as well. I bought a real cooler that just kind of sat on the passenger seat. I bought a Coleman stove, the small little, one of those small green propane cans, screws into the side of it, a way to kind of cook meals simply. And then I bought a small 40 amp hour power station. It's just not very large, fits into a milk crate. But it was just enough to, power my devices. And it was just enough that if I needed to add, run a heated electric blanket, it was just enough power that I could run it on low for probably about 6 hours. So those things made quite a bit of a difference for my next trip into Northern Ontario. Again, there were things that didn't work. So there's a couple lessons that I learned from my 3 weeks in Northern Ontario. Rain sucks in a car. It just does. I mean, when you're traveling, rain sucks in general, but when you are confined to a car, um, especially a minivan even would be much easier, or an SUV, because at least you could fully sit up. But in a car where you've lost 6 inches to a vertical height to a bed platform, the only space you have to sit is in the driver's seat. And I had 2 days where it just poured rain all day, and I ended up just getting a motel room. Because sitting in the car for 2 days was just not going to work. And when that happened, having traveled, I'm then thinking of things in terms of how much money would it take to fill my tank with gas, and how far can I drive on that? So I got a motel, and it's $120 a night, and a tank of gas is $60. So that gets me 500 kilometers, or 300 miles. And so I was thinking, okay, I just spent this money on a motel room for 2 nights. That's 4 tanks of gas. I could drive to Florida and back on that gas for that price. So it's it's so frustrating to spend this money just to sleep when it's raining. And so that factored into, okay, the kind of space I needed for traveling more longer term. What else did I learn? Just proper ventilation with functional bug screens is really important, especially in your spaces when you're in spaces with lots of mosquitoes. Northern Ontario in the summer, really bad for mosquitoes. I just realized as soon as the sun went down, I just needed to be in the vehicle with the windows up. I had some bug screens for the back windows, which gave me a little bit of cross breeze. I had bug screens for the front ones, but they didn't cover all of the window, and so that essentially made them not functional. And so it was still hotter than I wanted it to be inside the car, and I didn't have enough of a cross breeze, especially when there wasn't a whole lot of a breeze. And so I just knew getting proper ventilation with bug screens was going to be important to try to figure out. What else? Buying ice every day just sucks. I had a large cooler, and pretty much every day, actually I kind of had two coolers. I had my main cooler, and then I had a much smaller cooler. And the smaller cooler would be the one that I accessed most frequently. So my drinks would be in there, and the way I would prepare meals is I take out everything I needed quickly, and then that way I'm only opening the big cooler a couple times a day. But even so, I was still having to buy another bag of ice every single day. And that was that adds up pretty quickly. When you're paying $4 or $5 for a bag of ice, that every day, that starts to add up. So I realized I'm gonna have to figure something out that's a little more manageable than that. But the other thing too was just the system of where everything was in a car, because it's, especially since it's such a small space and you use every square inch just to store stuff. The biggest frustration over those 3 weeks was, where did I put that whatever? Where did I put this? Where did I put that thing? Where did I put that tool, that thing I needed for preparing this meal? Where did I put the flashlight? Where did I put the bug spray? That was always just incredibly frustrating, because it meant that I had to open the doors and pull things out of the vehicle in order to sort through things and to find out, okay, where did I put that thing? And so figuring that system out about what goes where, and it always goes back to that place. Figuring that out made a difference in terms of how accessible this kind of travel was going to be for me. There's actually, I did a YouTube, this is my first YouTube video that I did on traveling. So you can watch that video up on my YouTube channel. It's the oldest one that's up on there, about my trip into Northern Ontario, living out of my car for 3 weeks. So again, I was thinking, what can I improve? What can I improve for the next trip? Well, a proper car fridge or freezer was needed. So that was my next big purchase. That was the it was probably $350 for like a 38 liter, it'd be like 38 quarts roughly, fridge freezer combo. The divider in the middle, kind of the lid opens up off the top. It's longer than it was taller, and it was just the right size that it could slide in next to my bed. So the back seats of the car are down, the bed is in on one side, and the other half was taken up by this cooler, which I connected into that power unit that I had bought. And that made such a huge difference, not having to buy ice. Even though the interior volume was probably just slightly larger than the big cooler I had, none of that volume was taken up by ice anymore. And with half of it being a freezer, it just, I didn't have to get enough ice to keep the coldest things I needed cold, like the frozen items cold. And I had the option of storing like frozen meat to kind of take out as needed for meals. So that made a huge improvement for the trips after that. Getting a proper sleeping bag, because I was moving into winter now, and I wanted to do a bunch of hiking through Ontario on the Bruce Trail during the winter. And so I knew, given my experience in Boston and nearly freezing to death, I knew I needed something better than that. And so buying a proper sleeping bag for the winter was a huge improvement. So I got one off of Facebook Marketplace. Somebody was selling a hiking sleeping bag. It was a Sea to Summit Mummy sleeping bag. It was rated for minus 15 Celsius or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And that made such I got a huge difference. I was just shocked at the difference it made. That sleeping bag is so warm that like I have to limit what I wear and be really conscientious about like the kind of fabric I'm wearing when I'm in the sleeping bag, because it's very easy for me to overheat inside of that sleeping bag. And so once I had a sleeping bag that was that good, a heated blanket inside of the sleeping bag became completely unnecessary. I've held on to it just in case. I've still got it here in the van, just in case. But having a good sleeping bag that you know you can trust when it's well below freezing, is not just an ease of is not just nice to have. It's not just a good safety thing. But suddenly, like, it takes away the anxiety of worrying about bad weather in a car or sleeping in a van. Like, even now, I know that, like, if my batteries are dead, if I'm out of diesel fuel for my heater, that I can pull out that sleeping bag, and throw it on my bed, and I will be fine. Especially with the the comforter that I have, I will just be set. I don't have to worry about freezing to death. I'll be fine. So that made a huge difference for traveling in the winter in the car. And again, just having a non-thermal or a non-cotton thermal base layer is really important for cold weather camping. So yeah, that was the process for me. Over multiple trips, over about a year and a half, was just asking this question about what can I improve for not that much money. And each time I did that, it kind of did two things. So first of all, it made me realize like there's a lot of stuff I don't need to actually travel in the vehicle. But also like there's a lot of other things that can be incrementally improved. I don't need to have the best thing or the best system right away. is I can start with something much cheaper, and I can use that for a couple of trips, and then when I have a little bit more money, I can invest in something a little bit better. Or even something like the bed platform. I made improvements and changes to that. I was able to keep like the main like structure that I had built out of plywood, and I just made some improvements on it over time, or some changes. So there are things that you can do. You don't need to have everything all at the beginning to be able to make traveling in a vehicle functional. But I do think there are 5 things that really are just these 5 things. If you can get these 5 things, then you can do some more extensive traveling in whatever vehicle it is that you have. So this is my advice for this episode. What are the 5 things that you need to start traveling out of your vehicle? Number 1, you need ways to stay warm. That is, or if you're in really hot climates, the opposite. You need a way to stay cool. Because if you can't regulate the temperature of your body within your vehicle somewhat, you are putting your life at risk or your health at risk. So you need some ways to do that. Preferably, you have a couple of different ways to regulate body and environment, like interior temperature, so that if one thing fails, it's not a disaster. So find a way, especially like in Canada, you need a way to stay warm inside your vehicle. The first couple hours in a cold night are fine. You're probably good till about 3 a.m. Past 3 a.m., especially as you get to around 5 a.m., that is 5 a.m., 4 to 5 a.m. is the coldest time in a vehicle. Like, it just gets pretty much the same temperature as it is outside. All of the whatever heat was inside the vehicle, inside the fabric, inside your sleeping bag is all gone. And you need ways to stay warm. Number 2, you need a way to prepare food. This can be really simple. Like maybe you're traveling in an area where you're just eating out all of the time. Then you don't really need to do a whole lot. But it does make a big difference in price, even if you have something as simple as a Coleman stove. Or you don't even need like those 2-burner stoves. Like you can just go with a single burner. They have these new ones that have like a butane can that slides in sort of horizontally in the side. So that packs down really small. And then you just have like a single pot that you put on top of that. Like a pot with a lid. Like a little camping pot or a frying pan. Some way of cooking, preparing food. If you're just going to have one thing, go with a pot because it can double with a water. Like you can boil water with it. I've seen people just use something like a jet boil. They don't even have a frying pan or a Coleman stove kind of setup, just the jet boil, and which is like a single burner, kind of like a hiking stove. A little butane can that kind of screws into the bottom of it, and then it's got this cup on top, and most people use it to boil water for coffee, tea, whatever. But you can also like throw hot dogs in the top of it and boil things that way. You can poach eggs in it. You can, if you've got food in packages where it can, like you can put the like a hiking like meal, you can throw the package inside of the container and boil the whole thing inside of the package, and then just without a plate, you can just stick your spoon and eat right outside of the package. So just some way of preparing food is going to be essential, and that you don't need a big kitchen setup. And number 3, a bed that functions for you. What does that look like? It could look like my setup with like a folding little platform and a small mattress on top of it. Maybe you've got an SUV and you've got a really good air mattress that isn't going to get holes in it, and the back is flat, and so that works. It works well for a minivan as well. Maybe you're traveling in something that's a little bit more kind of like hatchbacky, station waggy. you're not really doing it a whole lot, and your seat goes back pretty far, and you're comfortable that way, great. That works. You just need something that functions for you so that when you wake up in the morning, you're not going to be all stiff and sore and regret your life. Um, just something that works for you. Again, if you're not doing this full time, you can sacrifice a little bit on comfort here. Like, I'm living full time in my van, which is why I've got a good bed, because it's the only bed that I have. And so I knew I needed to invest some money into that. But if you're just doing weekends, like, that's probably going to be fine. Number 4, some way of giving yourself privacy. You don't have to buy custom insulated blackouts for your vehicle. Like, they'll run you up, $600, $700 pretty quickly. You can make your own, like I've mentioned, or you can just, if your vehicle is already tinted, all you really need is a way to cover your windshield. And so that's, maybe that's $30 a Canadian Tire to get the windshield cover for your vehicle that fits well. But just some way of giving yourself some privacy so that you don't feel like you are living in a bubble for everyone to kind of watch whatever it is you're doing inside your vehicle. You need to be able to change without everybody getting a show. Number 5. Two-way, and this is maybe the most important. You need 2 ways of getting emergency help. For almost all of us, our cell phone is the first way, right? Calling 911. And it makes sense to have some kind of battery, like a battery pack, to be able to charge your phone in the event of an emergency. But I would argue you need a second way that is not your phone to be able to contact emergency services, especially if you are traveling into areas where it's possible you may lose cell service. So for some people, this is what's called a personal location beacon or locator beacon, or PLB. The most common one you'll see a lot with hikers is called the Garmin InReach. So they usually have a chemical battery and they're not charged by USB. So that means that the battery eventually expires after, 3, 4, 5 years. They're usually $200 to $400. Some of them require a subscription to a satellite service, but most allow you to contact emergency services, rescue services, without having a subscription. Subscription usually gives you options of like getting maps, weather, sending a couple of like pre-written out texts, that kind of thing, to like your key people. So that's one way you can do it. The way I do it is I have a set of like decent 2-way walkie-talkies that have like the weather, you can receive the weather radio channels on it, and then accesses a pretty large spectrum of radio channels. And then it also has like an emergency feature. They'll send out like a request signal across like the band for help. So that's the 2 that I have. I have my cell phone, and then I have a radio as well. 2 ways to get help in case of an emergency, in case you're stuck, in case the temperature drops, in case, you end up in a place where you feel kind of trapped in, and there's people around that you don't like, and you don't feel like you can get out. You need a way to be able to contact help. Vehicle breaks down, engine dies, transmission goes. You need a way of contacting help. So those are my 5 things. Ways to stay warm, ways to prepare food, a bed that functions for you, some way to give yourself privacy, and 2 ways to get emergency help. If you can figure out those 5 things, like, you are set. You can travel in your car anywhere in North America. You'll be fine. I hope you'll do it. I know, like, mostly at this point, this podcast is people I know that are just interested in what I'm doing and living vicariously through me. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. Thank you for your encouragement. But I hope you're able to figure out ways that you can travel without spending all of the money. You've got a vehicle. most of you have a vehicle, there's ways for you to travel without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on just one trip a year. And so I hope you'll figure it out and get creative and adventurous and give something a try. So just to kind of wrap up our time, I want to say thank you so much for listening to the Mark's Roamin podcast. If you'd like to follow along on this journey, I'm on YouTube and on Instagram, both at Mark's Roamin, like Mark's Roaming, but with no G on the end. And for more details on my travels, including map pins of the places that I'd recommend, you can check out my website, www.marksroamin.com. If you'd like to support this podcast and my travels, the best thing you can do at this point is to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast, and to share it with a friend. The music you're hearing is by Jayam, and it's licensed through a service called MusicBed. If you're looking for licensing music for a creative project, there's a link in the show notes to get a 14-day free trial. And finally, in big or small ways, I hope you'll join me in exploring our beautiful world. And because I'm a nerd at heart, I leave you with the words of Professor Tolkien, appropriate for a rainy and foggy day in Cape Breton. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go. But under a tall tree I will lie and let the clouds go sailing by.